Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I thought it would be fun and interesting to talk a little bit about how shamanism can support women through pregnancy or women who want to have children, and share some of my favorite shamanic stories about clients and students that I've worked with along this journey. But before I get into the fun stories that resulted in healthy babies being born into the world in graceful ways, I want to talk a little bit about just some context for this, because we are in a moment where women's right to choose as deeply about their reproduction in the United States is a point of really big contention, and it makes me really sad. There are a lot of people having a lot of potent conversations about this, but the piece that I want to illuminate before I go forward is I've been having conversations with my guides about women's choices related to having babies or not having babies. I've worked with thousands of clients who've had abortions and people who've had children, and there's a lot of energy that swirls around it on the human level, but I wanted to kind of give people an idea of what my guides have to say, because I've been taking counsel with them over and over. And so when we look at the big picture of the human experience, one of the things that is sacred from the perspective of our guides and the agreements that we make when we come in is that we have free choice. We get to choose. So our guides will say, go left, and if we're bound and determined to go right, even though down that path is a lot of complexity and maybe some experiences we won't enjoy, we have the right to move in the way we want to move. And there's a sacredness to that experience. And I have worked with the guides and done healing for women who have had abortions in soul retrieval. And what I would like to offer is, for some women, it's kind of a non-issue. It was something that they were super clear about and they just moved forward, and it wasn't a big deal, and there was no healing or soul cleanup needed. For other women, the weight of judgment and narratives and wrong and bad and how could you that maybe they had in their cultural context when they made a decision for themselves ended up making it way heavier. And for some women, there was a deep connection to this idea and a pragmatism that said, I just am not in a good place to do this. I don't have the financial support. I don't have the emotional or psychological health. I don't have the level of sobriety. So a whole range of responses and experiences of navigating this complicated, experience of having babies. And the thing that is incredibly consistent, though, is never, ever, ever have my guides said, that was a bad choice. You shouldn't have had an abortion. There was harm that was done to the soul. There are a lot of souls that just want to dip their toes in the water of incarnation. They're like, kind of want to try this on. I see the destiny path that this pregnancy isn't going to come to fruition. I'll just kind of drop in and feel into it. I don't want to make a full commitment. I think I'll take, being human for a test drive. And sometimes if that pregnancy is chosen for a soul that just wanted to dip in, there'll actually be a switch where another soul will step in after that soul steps out. So there's a lot of dynamic nature. And if a soul wanted to come in for a particular person and it didn't end up working out, then that soul moves on to an alternative, a backup plan, another possibility. So there is kind of an understanding when we start picking our parents and deciding, I think I want to have babies, or, I didn't want to have babies and then I do. There's a whole process of, kind of matchmaking on the other side. However, it's always done. The soul contracts are always written, hey, this is a possibility if in the human experience it comes to fruition, this would be a cool idea. And if it doesn't work out, here are the backup plans. So for example, we might have a soul that we're like, hey, want to get together and have babies when we incarnate? And the other soul's like, cool, yeah, that sounds awesome. And then they meet up and they're like, one or the other just doesn't choose it. Totally valid, absolutely built into the understanding of how we move as humans. And so we can have these ideas and we can have these notions, but at the end of the day, we decide our lives in the moment. And our soul longings and desires have a deep influence on how we move. Sometimes we move with them, sometimes we pick a different path. And I would offer that the choice to have a baby or not have a baby is complicated. There are people who have a deep soul longing. I really want to experience this. Maybe they were in a spiritual order and they took vows of celibacy, and being in the ashram was really satisfying for being the scholar, for being able to go deep with spirit, but they had a real longing to experience motherhood or fatherhood. And so in this lifetime, there's a real soul pull toward it. We certainly have a biological pull. So regardless of what our soul thinks about it, our biology is deeply biased toward the act of procreation. So there's a lot of chemistry and engagement that happens related to that. And then in between, there's our individual personality, our thinking mind. Who am I as a soul in a physical body anchored in space and time? And what's true about me? Like, what would work for me in terms of the circumstances? I think that for some women, there's a incredible clarity. I absolutely positively want children with every fiber of my being, and I am moving my life toward that outcome. And for other women, there's a lot of clarity, like 100%, absolutely, babies are not my thing. This is not what I want. And for most of us, there's more of a middle ground. I have a podcast gal that I follow, and she says, my husband and I are talking about babies. I'm setting up my entrepreneurship business around a maternity leave, around not having the time and the desire to work as hard as I'm working now. I'm looking forward, and I'm like 60-40 or maybe 70-30. I'm not somebody who's, really 100% one way or the other. I genuinely believe this is the path that we intend to go down, and that's what will happen. However, I'm really savoring the time, when it's just the two of us. And I think because of how much charge there's not as much space to explore the ambivalence or the complexity or the pros and cons. This same podcaster, Hillary Rushford, she's been a very successful entrepreneur, and she has this really fun podcast where she's like gives people all the reasons they might not want to be an entrepreneur, because most talk about entrepreneurs is people trying to sell you a program to help you succeed at being an entrepreneur. So they're talking about all the upsides of owning your own business, the freedom, the this, the that, the other thing, and it paints a really rosy picture. And so for someone who says, I wouldn't want to do anything else, I'm totally in with this path, I love it, and it's not for everybody, and here are a bunch of downsides. And she says she wishes there were a podcast, there may be somewhere, where someone's like, I love being a mother, but here are all the reasons that I would recommend against it for a lot of people. It's a complicated thing. So before I tell these kind of fun, cool stories and talk about how you can use shamanism to really support, if you're trying to get pregnant, if you are pregnant, if you're approaching delivery, there's some cool stuff that we can do to work with that. I just want to emphasize how much choice is honored. And I've worked with the souls that have danced with the coming in and had the pregnancy terminated. And the only way that soul is harmed is if the woman holds on to the soul out of some misguided sense of guilt, and it isn't free to go back into the backup plan. So if she inadvertently uses her intention and focus to bind that soul, and some of the souls that might have come in as babies are like, hey, I enjoy you a lot, I'll hang with you. They're hanging around. So it doesn't mean if you're like, oh, I really feel the presence of the child that might have been, whether it was a miscarriage or whether it was an abortion, and that feels good to you. It doesn't necessarily mean you're binding it, but sometimes that energy kind of gets a little stuck. And that's something we can clean up. So if you're a woman who has had an abortion and is having feelings about it or feels like, it was really impactful, we can do some healing. We can get it cleaned up. We can make sure everything's back in alignment really easily. But I want to be so, so clear that souls are not being harmed by abortions. They go back into the flow. It's so much a gentler, movement from, kind of potential embodiment. When a fetus is in utero, the soul kind of gets to dance in and out. They don't have to, stay really anchored in the body. And it's gentle. It's just not a big deal. And the guides are 100% like there's no harm that's been done. There's no karma that's built up unless you're holding on to pain. Like if you're holding on to pain, that's an impact, but there's no bigger picture of karma or you've done wrong or you should be ashamed or you've done something bad. They're just about like, wow, humans are crazy with the stories they make up and what they hold on to, and how can we help you release the weight of this energy in this story? And it's a hard one. A lot of people have a really intense narrative about this being bad and wrong, and it's easy to kind of take that on in the back of your mind. For me, with COVID, I was really clear that vaccination was the right choice for me. I chose not to have a ton of opinions about what other people should do. I could see the complexity of the whole thing and really see both sides of people's argument. No, people should get vaccinated on behalf of others. No, people should make good choices for themselves. Like, whole mess. But I noticed getting my booster that my head was louder, not because I didn't believe the science, but just because of all the intensity around it. Whereas the tetanus shot that I'd had, the last time I was at the doctor's was just not really on my mind. I'm like, it's just way smarter to have a tetanus shot given that I want to get up to those things. Cool. Moved right along. So understanding kind of how our neuroscience, how our brains respond to people who have a lot of emotional intensity behind a concept, I think is really important. And one of the interesting things that I kind of see sometimes, when we're talking about charged society concepts, is how much gets put onto motherhood. They're just so many expectations and demands and mommy guilt and, the woman in the Middle Ages who was just trying to keep everybody fed and, have less than half her children die would have been coming out ahead and try to keep the little one from toddling into the fire. And, this kind of psychological and emotional support that has kind of been layered on is just interesting. It's interesting kind of the weight of what we put on to this idea of motherhood. And it's useful, I think, to unpack your mind map so that if you are someone who is courageous enough to embark on motherhood, that you have a place where you can look at yourself in the mirror and feel like you're doing enough. What is good enough? Because there are so many conflicting, intense messages that come from a lot of different places, and other people's map for how you live your life kind of across the board can be really intrusive and toxic. So one of the ways that I use shamanic work is to extract from the third chakra, the solar plexus, other people's ideas of who you should be so that you can have your own map. And sometimes when I work with my soul retrieval clients, I see that one or both parents have imposed energetically a map of who they think their child should be. And it could still be a perfectly good functional map. It just doesn't belong to this soul. So it's good to clear this out so you can hear your own guidance and feel your own compass. I like to compare it to, you're not going to get around Albuquerque very well with a map of Chicago, but it's a perfectly good map if you were in Chicago. And so I just want to kind of kind of offer this as, if you're embarking on motherhood or any of your choices. I think particularly as women, it's good to do extraction and clear out some of these messages that we absorb unconsciously in culture, so we can really find our center, because it's still a lot to talk about what our soul desires as far as motherhood, what our biology desires as far as motherhood, and what our human everyday self, who's going to be there taking care of the baby, feels about motherhood. And getting those to work together and know which part is talking and make peace with all of them for your path forward, especially if they're ones that are in different places on the subject, is complicated inner work. So we want to not have other people at the table, so to speak, like our parents or the pastor of a church, if that's something you go to. If you're sitting down at the conference table to talk to the different parts of you, there's the financial planner, there's the heart that, maybe wants this, there's the soul desire, there's the biology. All of these parts of you, whoever you're partnered with would be someone in the conversation, but we don't want to accidentally put at the negotiation, let's work this out, let's pick a path forward, people who don't belong at that table, and we can end up doing that sort of unconsciously. So assuming that whether through a premeditated, I have decided to have babies and we're making a baby happen, or through oh wow, I'm pregnant, now is the moment that I get to make my choice about this, whether this is something I'm going to go forward with or not. If you're moving forward with a pregnancy, there's some really cool types of shamanic work that can be supportive. I love doing this for people, but it's also something that other skillful shamanic practitioners can really help with. And one of the things I like to really recommend for pregnant women is some destiny path work to help the delivery go well, and also some past life clearing, because one of the things about pregnancy that can be really, really challenging is how dangerous childbirth was to our ancestors. And in developed nations, one of the bestest things about the modern era is how death in childbirth and infant mortality have gotten such tiny numbers. And you can actually look at how that's showing up worldwide and see this massive improvement. Like even compared to the 60s, infant mortality pretty much everywhere on the planet has declined enormously, which I feel like is one of the really cool victories of how we're all collaborating on this planet together for all the ways that we could be on a performance improvement plan. So if you've had past lives where you were having babies and in a female body, you may have lost a child. It was usual that half your children wouldn't make it to adulthood. That was part of why people had these really huge families, because it was so vulnerable. It was hard to keep children alive through childhood, even with a lot of economic privilege for the time. And also, you may have past lives where you died in childbirth, where, it went really badly, where it was really traumatic, and you get kind of a do-over. You get this cool environment where you have a really good potential to see all of your children outlive you, and you have a really strong potential to have a safe and healthy childbirth experience. And at the same time, the fears of this can really, really arise. And so if we go in and proactively clear out past life trauma where this hasn't gone well, it can help you not have that kind of fear and anxiety in the back of your mind. So that's something that can be really, really helpful and supportive. And then, of course, the destiny path work can be really, really useful. So one of the most fun journeys I got to do, and I'm not conflating the circumstances that transpired with necessarily saying that my work with the guides was the defining factor. So I just totally want to acknowledge, you take the story for what it is, but I had some people that I knew in community, and She got pregnant and the pregnancy was going along great. And then they were a week or so out from the due date, and the baby that had been head down in the perfect position to be born suddenly flipped over. So there was all this anxiety and tension because she really wanted to have natural childbirth, not have a C-section, and she needed the baby to flip over. And, they were, looking at various, what do we do about this situation? And so I did a shamanic journey. I said, hey, I can do some journey work. They're like, yes, totally into it. And so what I found when I got into the journey was I went and had a conversation with the soul that was getting ready to come in. And it was a case of him just getting really cold feet at the last moment. He had incarnated in other lifetimes, had this really cool, like, Buddhist monk, amazing, neat, rich energy, but he also kind of at the last minute, like, yeah, this is great. I'm so into it. I'm so into it. And kind of like that, moment on the roller coaster where you're at the top and you're like, I don't know about my choices. If they let people exit the roller coaster, right before it went down, there might be some takers on that. And so he flipped around. He's like, wait, I want to put the brakes on this. And I had a talk with him. I said, it's okay. Let's review how your circumstances are going to be different. You're coming into some very functional parents who have chosen to have you. They're economically resourced. They're capable. There's a big community. You're really going to be held. We have modern medicine, so some of the things that were painful in other lifetimes aren't really going to be. It's going to be a better outcome. And the strategy of flipping around the other way so that you're not set up to be born isn't actually going to work. And the guides said to tell him, it'll be okay. You can stay where you are. You don't have to turn around. But what they're telling me is that if the drugs are in the system that go with a C-section are going to make you feel really sick and awful. You probably won't enjoy coming into the world that way as much as you would. And for anyone who needs a C-section, it's totally cool. It's awesome that we don't die in childbirth, but it's a little more graceful depending on your approach sometimes. Birth plans differ widely. I so want to acknowledge this, but for him, the guides were saying, you'll like your entry into the world. It'll be more comfortable. Spectacular as undoubtedly the being born process is. So it's up to you, but this isn't going to stop you being in the world on the schedule that you're set to be in the world. This turning around thing is only going to affect the outcome. So we'd invite you to turn around. I think you'll like your results better. And sure enough, very shortly thereafter, the baby flipped back around into the perfect position and was born in natural childbirth, totally successful, healthy delivery, healthy mom, healthy baby. And that was really cool. So it was just a neat way of working with something that happened. Another favorite experience of mine was a gal who was a student for a number of years and a client, so I got to work with her over the course of multiple years of her journey. And she had a health condition that made it ridiculously improbable that she would ever be able to have a baby. The medical model was like, yeah, the odds are really, really slim. We don't think this is going to happen. And she was just so completely clear. She wanted to have a baby. Her soul wanted to have a baby. Her heart and mind in the world wanted to have a baby. She even sat her partner down at the time, who wasn't sure, he was on the fence, and said, hey, we're going to be in San Diego for another year. You have the time to make up your mind. And at the end of that time, I'm going to move back to the East Coast. I'd love for you to come with me. But if you're not interested in moving back there and going forward with a baby, we're going to break up because I'm going to have a baby. And so take your time. No pressure. I'm not going to bring it up. I'm working on some other stuff, but I just want to be clear that this is the path that I'm on. And if it doesn't line up for you, then, no problem, but we will be parting ways. And she just, there was just this real calm, centered clarity that was absolutely true for her. And meanwhile, she embarked on all of the physical things she needed to do. So all of the, eating the right food and getting the right exercise and getting the most up-to-date medical care to support her condition, to move the dial, to put her body into the healthiest configuration. Because when we have these physical conditions, there's a range of experiences with them. And there are a lot of things that factor into that. But for some people, some of the time, lifestyle choices make a really big difference in what their experience is with a range of outcomes on a particular condition. So she was absolutely 100% on it as far as what she was doing for her body to line it up to be able to have a baby. And then the third thing she did, which was the fun thing for me to witness, because she was at the time I was running in-person shamanic training, and she was doing a series of journeys. And whenever we had a journey topic, she worked on it from the standpoint of having babies. So she had a past life that she cleared. She had ancestral things she cleared. She just went in and really worked the shamanic destiny path to, lining up to have a baby. And she worked the past life to clear anything that was in the way, and just kept working with the guides to say, okay, this is the outcome I want. How do I use shamanic healing on my body? How do I track the destiny path? How do I clear past lives? How do I clear stagnation in my body? One of the ways we use shamanism is, okay, we want this outcome. What's in the way? What's in the way of having that just be what moves into place? And a lot of times it's not so much a question of how do I get there, it's what's in the way. And when you eliminate that, things can move forward really gracefully. And after this time of watching her just really be clear about her decision and her desire in the world, she did indeed move back to the East Coast. Her partner at the time did indeed decide he was in for fatherhood, and she got pregnant and had a boy, and healthy and vibrant. And we haven't really kept in touch, but over the years I would see posts on Facebook about, her kid growing up really, really happily for her. And granted, Facebook is a highlights reel. I've teased my sister who has little ones about it being propaganda for babies, because of course people tend to post the pictures of their children smiling and laughing and looking adorable and just so appealing, and not the great meltdowns that you're probably, sometimes people video those for keeping it real, but a lot of times, that's not what we see on Facebook. But it just made me really, really happy for her, because she overcame these tremendous physiological and biological odds by being so clear and so on purpose. And it was just a really neat thing to witness. And then another, again, longtime client, student, and personal friend of mine had just a really neat journey. I got to know her through multiple relationships, and one of the things that she really did work with in dating, I had times when I did journeys for her, and the guide said things like, if you stay with this guy, knowing what the warning flags are, it's putting at risk your ability to have the children that you want to have. And there was another just really sweet soul connection that she had. A lot of love, a lot of alignment, a lot of really beautiful energy. But he was kind of all in his upper chakras. He was really more, like you could call it the Kokopelli archetype. So, he was happy to sleep on somebody's couch and not super economically reliable, and interested in kind of this sort of freedom. And talking to her, the feedback from the guides in one particular journey was, you're not going to want to raise a baby in insecure housing. You're just, when we look at like what would be good for you in motherhood, having this kind of van life, on the road, not having that anchored, and he's not really going to contribute. So what this would look like is taking complete economic responsibility for 3 people, you, him, and the baby, and working as well as doing the motherhood thing. And that just wouldn't be the most advantageous aligned for you circumstance in which to have a child. So much as you love him, just really have the conversation with all these parts of yourself. So she did. She ended up stepping away from the connection, and just sort of charting that desired destiny path through her dating experiences. So then at some point she went to a retreat, met somebody, whirlwind attraction, and found herself pregnant, and it was really aligned, that they both wanted the baby, and they moved forward with making things work out. And it was a really complicated time because when I journeyed on it and I looked what had happened, it was kind of a guide override where this pregnancy happened because of the agreement of her soul, his soul, and the child that wanted to come in all being really in a hell yes. And the humans were kind of like, yeah, you'll get on board with this. But there was all this like, kind of take apart on the structure of their very different lives that suddenly got integrated. And there was a lot of kind of emotional ups and downs. It's sort of intense when, things move forward. Now, the soul connection between this woman and her partner is profound. So by no means was this a pairing that was about, we don't really match as a couple, but we're staying together for the sake of the child. Very, very deep, profound soul connection from my outside estimation, from having done work with her and her partner and, everyone concerned. But it was a take apart on the direction that her life was flowing, and that was really abrupt and had just some tough years with a lot of emotionality before the waters leveled and they came into alignment and the human selves caught up to the soul plan and the baby was thriving and the economic situation was, solid enough. It's always, I think, a little tough for most people, keeping up with babies, but, really, really good and solid. So celebrated, like, yay, I really was happy for the vision and, such. And then a little bit down the line, they decided they wanted to invite second baby into their world. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, it's one of those things that was hard, and the guides really showed me about the purpose it serves. She had a miscarriage. And as someone who hasn't wanted a child and had a miscarriage, I admit that the amount of how wrenching and painful and excruciating that is something I really can't know, but I've supported women very close to me through it. And it just seems like one of the hardest things that we go through as people. Really, really difficult, painful to long for pregnancy, to long for that baby, to try to get pregnant, and then to have the wanted, desired pregnancy not go forward. Really, really hard thing. And she's someone who has a lot of depth and sensitivity and richness of spirit, and it just hit her really hard. And we did some work together at the time, and some of it was just supporting her in, restoring herself and accessing her well of resilience, and over time getting back to good and getting back to center. But on a larger scale, what the guides showed me about this process and this journey was they said, the first pregnancy was really hard because you were doing all the human processing at the same time that you were growing a baby and your life was shifting and changing. And there's some past life weight that was residing in your uterus and some old pain and fear and difficulty around all the emotions that went with the previous pregnancy. And we don't want that for you for the next one. We don't want that for you for the next baby. It would be really good for that to be really graceful. And so this process is just really about cleaning out the womb of a lot of energetic weight that was carried from other lifetimes that never really got to be cleared, that was the emotional intensity that went with that first pregnancy. And absolutely, she went through a really deep grief and emotional process, and we did shamanic work to really, cleanse and clear out all of these energies that were being released. And then a little while down the road, she got pregnant again, and it was just a really cool journey to witness. She had a really healthy pregnancy when the baby came, it came really fast before the midwife could even get there. She was just ready to be in the world. Into the world she came. And from what I've been able to tell, granted from the outside, she's just a really happy soul that is in joy with being in the world. And there's a beauty to this collection of souls, of the parents and the children who all really harmonize and resonate and feel like they belong together. And so really looking at these journeys, there's so much here, and I don't mean to tell these stories or feel like it addresses the nuance of everyone's experience. That's certainly something that would be better suited to a one-on-one session. But working with the shamanic work and understanding that, things like, really clearing and opening up your second chakra is going to be really supportive. There are a lot of things that we might do if we knew that children were on the horizon and something that we really wanted in our lives. We might choose partners that would be in for that. I think there's a lot of power for, also being able to be independent. Many women end up having children, often in relationships that don't work out, and then, continuing to date, continuing to be involved. So feeling like if you don't find the perfect person to partner with before you jump into having the baby, that, all is lost, you'll never have a partner, is not necessarily the case. So I'm all for women having the option of doing it on their own. But even with one baby and two parents, and that can still be a lot. It could still be really tough on mom and dad and the nuclear family. Back when we did it in tribal times, mom and dad might have gone and worked in the field or gone hunting and gathering while grandparents sat with the kids. And we have this really interesting biology where as women, we have this limited duration, and yet our lifespan is longer, which means that mothers are not in competition with their daughters for keeping babies alive, which tends to often make resources of older people available so that it can really be a communal effort. Because I think that the ratio of adults working with children, the higher that level is, and the more people who can contribute, there's certainly an ease that can go into that. But people can think about the economics and the relationship choices they want to make, and everything that goes into what would really line up. And I just want to kind of share that there's also an invitation where taking counsel with your soul is really valuable. Clearing energy, clearing past lives, working on destiny paths, sort of getting that woven into the experience, because people talk about a lot of things related to having babies and how that goes, but I think there's less conversation about how soul healing and having a really healthy energy body and working effectively to clear past lives and track destiny paths can be incredibly supportive for getting to have choice. And one of the things that's hard about being human is sometimes no matter how much energy work we do and how much we choose things, the biology doesn't always get on board. There are absolutely people who've done all the acupuncture and all the fertility treatments and all the work on all the levels and still don't conceive, and so I don't want to imply by any means that this is a magic bullet. However, I do feel that there's a grace that can be introduced if you tend to this side of things. So you can amplify the grace and the ease and the flow and the alignment, and you can amplify probability. So working with the energetic and the soul choices and kind of making deals and planning out, I think there's a lot of merit to examining our soul contracts in a way that we work with our human experience combined with our team of guides and advisors and our higher self. Because one of the things that can happen, and I work with a lot of people, and this is part of why I'm so adamantly pro-choice, I work with a lot of people who came in naively to situations that were objectively really hard, where there was neglect, where there was abuse, where they had their fight or flight activated constantly throughout their childhood because they fundamentally didn't have enough emotional, psychological, and physical safety to really thrive. And they survived, and kudos to them. They're coming to me for healing so that we can shift and change these things. And there's a lot of help in the world for the people who had those adverse childhood experiences and are suffering as a result. But the soul contract, because I've had people ask me in a really raw, painful way, they say we choose our parents, but why would I have chosen this? That's crazy. And what I've been shown is, in the lack of immediacy, when we're in spirit, when we're connected to all that is, when we have really beautiful healing gifts to bring to the world, when we're excited to participate in the modern era, we just may not be connected to the reality of what a violent alcoholic father and a mother who's failing to protect will mean for us as a 2-year-old. There's not a lot of soul override that will offset the trauma for a 2-year-old. And I have worked with a lot of people who leaned very heavily on the strength and resilience and wisdom of their soul to have much better outcomes than you would expect with some really adverse conditions. But at the same time, I think that there's sort of a naively jumping in, hand waving things that once you're in the middle of the experience are a lot more intense and difficult and painful than anticipated. I think they're like, oh, I'll be in a developed nation, I'll have access to dental care, I'll just do my time with these crazy people and then I'll have all this freedom. And the trouble is that we don't factor in as souls the neuroscience of and the biology and the constantly activated fight or flight and the impacts on our health and our relationship skills and a whole bunch of other things. So I honor souls' choices to jump into adverse conditions, and I also really honor women who make the complicated decision that bringing a child into a given situation isn't really optimal, that they maybe are struggling to provide for the children they have. That's one of the top reasons women get abortions. I'm already trying to take care of the kids I have, and when a woman has an abortion for that reason, her children hit developmental markers faster and better than a woman who ends up being forced to have the child when that was the reason she was seeking an abortion. So it's complicated. I think that, being in your own lane is really valuable on this, and just honoring the diversity of how people approach this. There's a lot here, and I've gone long on this podcast, and I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface, but I'm hopeful that this feels supportive, whatever your choices, and if it is something that you're navigating through, consider that there may be some rich resources in kind of the soul healing side of things that could help you on your path, whatever that may be. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.